I looked at my daughter-in-law across the boardroom table and I understood, for the first time in my life, that I had raised a coward and buried a stranger's grandson's future in the same year. The room was silent except for the low hum of the ventilation system, the kind of silence that sits on your chest right before something breaks. My lawyer, a sharp, tireless man named Gerald Whitmore, stood by the door with a leather folder tucked under his arm, and inside that folder was a piece of paper that was about to end the life my son's wife thought she had already won. Nobody in that room knew what I knew. Not yet. 3 weeks earlier, I had buried my wife of 42 years, and 3 days after that funeral, my daughter-in-law walked into my kitchen and told me it was time to hand my company to my grandson. My name is Walter Hensley. I am 68 years old, and for 39 of those years I built a company called Hensley Millworks out of a single leased warehouse in Scranton, Pennsylvania, into one of the largest custom furniture manufacturers on the East Coast. My wife, Carol, was the reason any of it existed at all. She kept the books when I couldn't tell a ledger from a lumber invoice. She believed in the business before the business had earned a single dollar of anyone's belief. And in March, after 11 brutal months fighting pancreatic cancer, I held her hand in a hospital room in Scranton General and watched her go. I want you to understand something before I go any further, whoever you are listening to this from. Grief does not arrive and leave on anybody's schedule. It moves into your house like a tenant who never pays rent and never leaves. I was still finding Carol's reading glasses and couch cushions. I was still setting 2 coffee cups down in the morning out of 42 years of habit before I caught myself. That is where I was, 3 days after the funeral, when my daughter-in-law Renata walked into my kitchen wearing a cream-colored blazer and heels that clicked against my hardwood floor like a countdown. She did not hug me. She did not ask how I was sleeping, or whether I was eating, or whether I needed anything at all. She set a thick manila folder on my kitchen island, right next to the box of Carol's prescription bottles I still hadn't found the strength to throw away, and she said, "Walter, we need to talk about the future of the company." I looked at the folder. Across the top, in bold black lettering, it read, "Transition of Executive Authority." "Renata," I said, keeping my voice level. "My wife has been gone for 3 days." "I know," she said, and she had the decency to at least soften her tone, though not her intent. "That's exactly why we need to act now, before things get any harder for you. You're 68, Walter. You've got high blood pressure. The doctors have said themselves that stress is the thing that's going to put you in the ground next. Ryan and I have talked about it, and we think it's time Tyler steps in as the face of the company. You'd still be chairman emeritus. You'd keep your title. You just wouldn't have to carry the daily weight anymore." Tyler was my grandson, 19 years old, a boy who had failed 2 semesters of community college and spent most of his waking hours filming himself doing backflips off the dock at the lake house for an audience of 40,000 strangers on the internet. I loved that boy. I had loved him since the day he was born, red-faced and screaming, in a delivery room in Wilkes-Barre. But loving him and believing he could run a 110-employee manufacturing company were 2 entirely separate things, and Renata knew that as well as I did. My son Ryan stood behind her in the doorway, and he would not look at me. 41 years old, and he stared at his shoes like a boy waiting to be scolded. I had paid for his degree in business administration at a university that cost more per year than my first delivery truck had cost outright. I had given him a title at the company he barely used, and here he was, letting his wife do the talking while he studied the grout lines in my kitchen tile. "I'll think about it," I told her, and I meant it the way you mean it when someone hands you a live wire and asks you to hold it a little longer. "Don't think too long," Renata said, sliding a pen across the counter toward me, a heavy gold pen, the kind bought specifically to make a signature feel inevitable. "The board meets in 5 days. It would be so much better if this came from you, Walter, and not from a vote." That last part was not a suggestion. It was a threat wearing the clothing of concern, and I recognized it instantly, because I had spent 39 years learning to hear the difference between people who wanted to help me and people who wanted something from me. They left. I stood alone in my kitchen with the water running over a single drinking glass I didn't need to wash, and through the reflection in my dark kitchen window, I watched Renata pause in my driveway. She pulled out her phone. She typed something quickly, her thumbs moving with the practiced speed of a woman who had rehearsed this moment more than once, and just before she got into her car, I watched her mouth move. I couldn't hear her. I didn't need to. I have read lips across a factory floor over the roar of industrial saws for 4 decades, and what she said was 3 words: he'll cave first. I stood there a long time after their taillights disappeared down my street. And I want to be honest with you about something. I was not the broken old man they believed they'd walked in on. I built Hensley Millworks with $63 in a business checking account and a used delivery van with a cracked windshield. I had negotiated with steel suppliers who thought a small custom shop from Scranton didn't deserve a seat at the table. I had survived 2 recessions and a warehouse fire that nearly took the whole operation down in 2009. A man does not survive those things by folding the first time somebody slides a gold pen across a counter and calls it kindness. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at Carol's old desk in the study, and I did what I have always done when I don't trust the story I'm being told. I started pulling threads. The first thread was small. My employee badge, the master key that had opened every door in that building for over 3 decades, stopped working 2 mornings later. I stood at the executive entrance at 6 in the morning, swiping it 3 times against the reader, watching the little light blink red each time. Access denied. Having some trouble, Walter? The voice came from behind me, and I turned to find Douglas Kemper standing in the dim hallway, our chief financial officer, a man I had personally hired 11 years earlier out of a mid-sized accounting firm in Philadelphia. He was wearing too much cologne for 6 in the morning and a smile that didn't reach anywhere near his eyes. "My badge isn't reading," I said. "Oh, right, I should have mentioned it. We're doing a full security overhaul on the server access this week. Ryan authorized it Monday. Said you'd be taking some time to grieve properly, so there was no rush getting you back into the system." He said it so smoothly, so rehearsed, that I understood in that exact moment this had been planned before Carol's casket had even been lowered into the ground. "Ryan authorized locking me out of my own building. Temporary measure, Walter. Nothing personal. You should go home. Rest. We've got it handled." I did not argue with him. I have learned that the man who raises his voice in a hallway has already lost the conversation. I simply nodded, turned around, and drove myself to a small office supply store 40 minutes outside of town, where I purchased a laptop with cash, under a name that was not my own, using an identity I had quietly built for exactly this kind of situation years earlier, back when I first started suspecting that not everyone circling my company had my best interests in mind. Here is something Renata did not know about me. 7 years earlier, after I caught a warehouse manager quietly padding invoices to a shell supplier, I had installed a private mirrored backup server off the company network entirely that copied every financial document, every email, every signed contract that passed through Hensley Millworks. Nobody knew it existed except me and the technician who built it, a man sworn to more confidentiality than most priests. They could lock me out of every door in that building. They could not lock me out of the truth. For the next several weeks, I watched everything unfold from a guest room I rarely used, on a laptop nobody knew I owned, while pretending, every single day, to be exactly the grieving, defeated old man they wanted me to be. I let Ryan believe I was softening. I let Renata believe her timeline was working. I attended one shortened board meeting where Tyler sat at the head of the table in a suit that still had the crease marks from the store, nodding at things he clearly did not understand, while I said almost nothing at all. And then, on a rainy Thursday in April, my phone rang at 11:40 at night, and it was Ryan, his voice shaking in a way I hadn't heard since he was a boy. "Dad, it's Tyler. There's been an accident. His car, he hit a guardrail on Route 9. They're taking him to Scranton General right now." I was in my car before he finished the sentence. The waiting room at Scranton General smelled like burnt coffee and antiseptic, and Renata was already there when I arrived, pacing in heels across the linoleum, her phone pressed to her ear, and I caught the tail end of what she was saying before she noticed me. "I don't care, we cannot lose the trust transfer timeline over this. Tell the board we'll reschedule to Monday." She hung up when she saw me. Her son was somewhere behind those double doors bleeding, and she was worried about a boardroom calendar. I felt something cold settle into my chest that had nothing to do with fear for Tyler, and everything to do with finally, fully understanding exactly what kind of woman had been sitting across my kitchen island. An hour later, a tired-looking surgeon in blue scrubs pushed through the double doors and called for the family of Tyler Hensley. "He's stable," the doctor said, and Ryan exhaled like a man surfacing from underwater. "We stopped the bleeding in his leg, but his hemoglobin is dropping. We need to get him a transfusion. And quickly. Unfortunately, your son has a rare blood type AB positive, and due to a highway pileup earlier this week, our blood bank is critically low. We need direct family donors to cross-match immediately. Something in my chest went very still. I am O positive. Carol, may she rest, was O positive as well. And Ryan, I know this because I remember sitting in a hospital waiting room decades ago when he had his tonsils removed as a boy, and the surgical intake papers were laid out plainly in front of me. Ryan is O positive too. Two parents with type O blood cannot, under any law of human genetics that has ever existed, produce a child who carries the B antigen at all, let alone a grandchild. AB positive is not possible in that bloodline, not mathematically, not biologically, not under any circumstance I had ever learned, in 40 years of insisting my children understand the science. Their expensive educations were supposed to teach them. I stood in that hospital corridor with the fluorescent lights humming overhead, and 39 years of running a manufacturing company, 39 years of catching discrepancies in supply orders, of noticing when a number on a page didn't sit right, collapsed down into a single, devastating question I could not stop asking myself. If Ryan is not Tyler's biological father, then whose son is that boy sleeping in a hospital bed down the hall? I did not say a word to Renata that night. I have learned, in business and in life, that the person who reveals what they know before they understand what to do with it has already lost the advantage. I drove home in silence, and I did not sleep. And at 5 in the morning I opened my mirrored server, and I began searching, quietly, methodically, the way I have searched through every ledger that ever tried to hide something from me. It took me 4 days to find him, Marcus Doyle, 44 years old. He had joined Hensley Millworks as a regional sales director 19 years earlier. 19 years. The same 19 years Tyler had been alive, and he had left the company abruptly 18 years ago, right around the time Renata had announced, tearfully, joyfully, that she and Ryan were expecting their first child. I found emails on the mirrored server, buried under folders labeled with client names, going back years, not recent ones. Old ones, careless ones, written back before people understood how permanent digital records could be. I found the kind of correspondence a man does not send to a former coworker. I found a paper trail that answered the question the blood bank had accidentally forced open. But that discovery, as devastating as it was not even the largest thing I found buried in that server. Because while I was searching Renata's old emails for the truth about Tyler's father, I found something else entirely. A thread of financial transfers routed through Douglas Kemper's CFO credentials, moving money in careful increments of just under the federal reporting threshold, out of the company's vendor payment accounts and into an offshore account registered in the Cayman Islands. Not a small amount. Over the past 3 years, Renata and Douglas Kemper had quietly siphoned $3.8 million out of Hensley Millworks, funneling it through fake vendor invoices for a supply company that, according to every business registry I could find, did not actually exist. I understood, finally, completely, what I was looking at. This had never been about protecting a grieving old man from stress. This had never been about Tyler's future. Renata needed control of the company, transferred quickly and quietly to a 19-year-old boy who trusted her completely, because a chairman emeritus with time on his hands and a mirrored server full of receipts was the single greatest threat to a scheme that had been running for years. I called Gerald Whitmore that same morning. Gerald had been my lawyer for 22 years, since before Hensley Millworks had its first out-of-state contract, and he was one of maybe 4 people left on this earth I trusted without reservation. I sat in his office and I laid out everything, the emails, the transfers, the fake vendor, the blood type that shouldn't exist, and Gerald, a man I had never once seen rattled in over 2 decades of knowing him, sat back in his chair and exhaled, like he'd been holding his breath the entire meeting. "Walter," he said, "this isn't just a family matter anymore. This is federal wire fraud." We spent the next 11 days building the case properly. Gerald brought in a forensic accountant. We coordinated quietly with an agent from the FBI's Financial Crimes Division named Special Agent Renee Castillo, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who told me plainly that cases like this fall apart when families try to handle them like family business instead of what they actually are, a crime. We froze nothing prematurely. We tipped no one off. I kept attending board meetings, looking exactly as tired and defeated as they wanted me to look, and every single night I went home and helped build the case that would end it. The board meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in the same conference room where Hensley Millworks had signed its very first major contract, back in 1987, with Carol sitting beside me in a folding chair because we couldn't yet afford real office furniture. There was something almost unbearably fitting about that. Renata arrived early, in a sharp navy suit, radiating the particular confidence of a woman who believes she has already won. Ryan sat beside her, not meeting my eyes, same as always. Tyler was there too, his legs still healing, sitting at the head of the table in the chairman's seat. They had already started rehearsing him into, completely unaware of the earthquake about to open beneath him. "Walter," Renata said, sliding a final document across the table, that same gold pen resting on top of it. "The board is ready to formalize the transition today. I know this is hard, but it's time." I did not reach for the pen. Instead, I looked toward the door, and right on cue, it opened, and Gerald Whitmore walked in, flanked by Special Agent Castillo and a second federal agent I did not recognize. Gerald did not say a word. He walked to the head of the table and set two things down in front of Renata. The first was a paternity test, sealed and certified, confirming what the blood type had already told me, that Tyler Hensley was the biological son of Marcus Doyle, not Ryan Hensley. The second was a federal indictment listing $3.8 million in wire fraud, routed through a shell vendor account controlled jointly by Renata Hensley and Douglas Kemper. I watched the color drain out of Renata's face in real time. I watched Ryan's hands begin to shake as he read the paternity results, his whole understanding of his marriage and his son collapsing in the span of about 4 seconds. And I watched Tyler, 19 years old, healing from a car accident, sitting in a chairman's seat that had never actually been his to inherit, look around the table with the dawning horror of a boy realizing every adult in his life had lied to him about something fundamental. "This is a mistake," Renata said, her voice cracking for the first time since I'd known her. "Walter, please, we can discuss this like family. We stopped being family the day you slid a signature line across my kitchen counter 3 days after I buried my wife," I said, and my voice did not shake at all. "You didn't want to protect the company from stress, Renata. You wanted control of it before I found out what you and Douglas had been doing for 3 years. You just picked the wrong boy's blood type to build a lie around." Special Agent Castillo stepped forward. "Renata Hensley, Douglas Kemper, you're both under arrest for wire fraud and conspiracy to commit fraud." Douglas, who had been sitting quietly through all of this, made the mistake of reaching for the door, and 2 agents were on him before he made it 3 steps. "I want to tell you what happened after, because I think it matters more than the arrest itself." Ryan did not go to prison. He hadn't known about the fraud, and the investigators confirmed that quickly he was guilty of weakness, not theft. And weakness is not a federal crime, though I sometimes think it should carry its own kind of sentence. But he lost everything else. His marriage ended within the month. His understanding of his own son's face, every birthday, every Christmas morning for 19 years, had to be rebuilt from a lie into a different kind of truth. I watched my son move into a small 2-bedroom apartment on the north side of town, taking a job as a shift supervisor at a hardware store. A 41-year-old man learning, far too late, the value of things he'd never had to earn himself. I did not gloat over that. I felt something closer to grief for the son I had spoiled into someone who could not stand upright when the wind changed. Renata pled guilty 8 months later to reduce her sentence, and the court ordered full restitution alongside 4 years in federal prison. Douglas Kemper received 6, and Tyler is the part of this story I think about the most. That boy did nothing wrong. He was born into a lie he never asked for, and raised inside a scheme he never knew existed. And the easiest thing in the world would have been for me to let him go with his mother's fallout, to treat him as collateral damage the way collateral damage usually gets treated. I did not do that. I drove to the small apartment where he was staying with a college friend 3 weeks after the arrests, and I sat across from him at a cheap kitchen table, and I told him the only thing I actually believed to be true. "You are still my grandson," I said. "Blood didn't make that true 19 years ago, and blood test results don't undo it now. I watched you grow up. I taught you how to change a tire in my driveway. None of that becomes a lie just because we found out who your biological father is. Tyler cried at that kitchen table in a way I don't think he'd let himself cry since the accident. And I made him a promise that day, one I intended to keep completely. I did not let Hensley Millworks fall into the hands of an entitled heir who never earned a single day of it. And I did not let it fall into the hands of the executives who'd spent 3 years quietly stealing from it either. Instead, 6 months after the trial concluded, I stood on the roof of our headquarters building in Scranton, the same building I had watched go up brick by brick over a decade, and I signed the paperwork that restructured Hensley Millworks permanently. 40% of the company's ownership was placed into an employee stock ownership program, distributed among the machinists, the floor supervisors, the delivery drivers who had built this company with their hands, the same way Carol and I had built it, with a folding table and a stubborn refusal to quit. Another 30% was placed into the newly established Carol Hensley Trade Scholarship, funding vocational and manufacturing education for young people who had ambition but no money to chase it, because Carol always believed the world had more value in it than a diploma from an expensive school could measure. And the remaining 30% I placed into a trust for Tyler, not handed to him outright, not signed over on a rushed Tuesday morning by a grieving old man with a gold pen pressed into his hand, but structured over 10 years, tied to him finishing his education and learning the business from the floor up, the same way I had learned it, the same way every good thing I ever built had to be earned one difficult year at a time. I still go into that office 3 mornings a week, even now, even though my badge works again and nobody has to sneak a laptop out of a locked room to protect what belongs to them. I sit in the same conference room where it all nearly ended. And some mornings Tyler sits across from me, learning the business the right way. And I think about Carol, and I think about how she used to say that family isn't a name on a birth certificate or a signature on a document. It's who shows up when everything falls apart, and who stays standing after. They thought a grieving old man would sign anything just to make the pain stop. They were wrong about that, and they were wrong about something else too. A man doesn't spend 39 years building something out of nothing without learning exactly how to protect it when the people closest to him decide it's theirs to take.